It's time for Myth of the Week.
Alright, this one comes from social media. We were kind of arguing a little bit back and forth. Somebody had a cut-in box that was mounted on the exterior of a dwelling unit, and I was kind of like, is that box wet location rated? And they're like, no, it doesn't have to be, because it's going to have a gasket over it and it's going to be all good. And I'm like, this brings up a pretty big gray area. Now, the actual premise of this, I've actually had an inspector argue with me on this before. I was at a job. We were doing like a pet store, and they needed some switches to shut their fish tanks off. So we cut switches in and we shut their fish tanks off. And the inspector's like, oh, you can't use those boxes for new construction. And I'm like, okay, well, what can I use these boxes for? And it says, oh, well, it's only for existing buildings only. And I'm like, okay, so this is a brand new building permit that you're signing off on. And they built the wall, they textured the wall, they painted the wall, now it's existing, you know? And so I was like, so I can go right next door to the building that already has the permit signed off, and I could go put a cut in over there, but I can't put a cut in right here with the same exact wall that's been existing for the same amount of time. And he's like, and he ended up letting us do it, you know? But I kind of saw his point when it comes to how the device outlet is mounted. So this device outlet is dependent on like the wall. So it's not physically mounted to anything in the building structure. I thought that was kind of interesting. You know, I kind of saw his point. At the same time, I don't know how you can really get around it. Now this one I feel brings up a gray area, because let me ask you this, James. Where is that box mounted? Is that mounted inside the wall?
No.
It's mounted on the exterior of a building.
That's the way I would view this.
To me, that's where I feel the gray area comes up. And if you go look at 11028, it gives you lists of different box, criteria of what their rating is. And yeah, that's a good one there. And these boxes are, that box that was just in the picture was NEMA 1, which means for indoor use only. It says do not use this box on exterior at all. Mm-hmm. So it's funny because this is where the gray area comes in, and I'm not trying to argue with anybody. I'm not trying to call anybody stupid or say anybody's wrong. What I'm saying is, if you go off the code, they always want to do this to us. They want to say we can't read, we're not reading the code, but then when we read the code and it doesn't align with them, then we're wrong, or we're idiots, you know? But the whole thing is, what I'm trying to say is, if you go look at what this box is rated for, this box is not rated for that location. Now, there could be sun aspects that could be involved in that box. You could sit there and say, oh, well, it's going to get a rubberized gasket that's going to go over it. All right, well, if all of a sudden that box deteriorates and falls in the wall, you're going to say, well, that was installed in the wrong location. You know, that box was never designed to be installed in an exterior location. You don't know what those extremes are being. I mean, that box might not even last one season in Alaska. You know, so a lot of these guys, they have to write a lot of these codes to apply to a bunch of different locations. It can't just be like, dude, there was times where there's fixtures that were installed in Colorado, and they were never designed to be installed with a temperature that goes below 32 freezing.
Mm-hmm.
And so what do we have to do? We had to go get warming blankets to cover the ballast, to warm the ballast if it goes below 32. You know, like, I mean, to me, I've never seen anything like that. Like, why do you need such an expensive correction when your listing and labeling is coming from a place that never goes below freezing? You know, and I know we talked about that with Crystal Hunter when she was on, And she was blown away because she's like, yeah, you guys are right, because there is equipment that's tested and listed in places like California, in places with warm climates, and then you have to go install it in Alaska. And right away, that's a code violation to install that at a temperature, ambient temperature that's below. Well, that's where they get these NEMA 1 ratings from, is from what ambient temperature it's going to be subjected to. There was actually a joke that I used to do back in the day, where if you don't exceed 86 degrees Fahrenheit, you could actually increase this. You could increase your ampacity by 0.4%.
Right.
You know, so like that 0.4%, it's like an adjustment factor. Well, the same thing applies here. You can't just take a product that's not listed for exterior and install it exterior. To me personally, that what was in the picture, I think is totally fine. But in my opinion, it's a code violation.
Sure, I can speak directly on this. You know, because Dad and I went to Alaska. We actually wrote the inspection procedure for the pump stations. And we actually went to different ones all through Alaska there. And those pump stations had a lot of equipment that had started rusting. Well, those pump stations have been there for a while too. So, you know, and back then they were just using, you know, regular boxes and things like that. So what we ended up doing is basically like when you're looking at this table, because you got different climate there and they got salts and things like that all around. So what we ended up having to do is look at an enclosure that was rated for corrosive environments. And we wrote all that up and they had to go in and change that. Matter of fact, we had to even do some stuff on the conductor because of the temperature ratings that were there. So we did calculations with the conductors at those lower degrees, just like you would if you had conductors that are over 86 degrees Fahrenheit, how we look at derating the conductors for that, applying an adjustment factor. So I understand where this, you know, you need to look at this table. And what is interesting is when you look at the table, right in this table here, this table 11028, and this deals with your enclosure selections. And where you really want to look at this is you want to look at note 1. Okay. You have an informational note there and they tell you what type of enclosure is typically used where you apply the term rain type. Okay. Then there's other types that you would look where you're looking at rain proof. Okay. Yeah. So in this case, I would consider it being up against the building there. You've got an overhang and all that. I'd probably look at this if I was an inspector looking at it being rain tight. That would.
Yeah. And I would say it's possibly a damp location. The one part that I want to add to this is David has a really good comment. So when you're an inspector, you're saying that material appears to be hardy board. Well, yeah, that's true, David. That hardy board has like a 50-year warranty on it. Now you're putting a box in there that's relying on, that's going to deteriorate that material. Not only deteriorate that material, but it's going to deteriorate outside of that material. And so it has a lifespan less than that hardy board. It would be that would be my rejection as an inspector, is I would say that plastic box would not outlive the hardy board.
I can tell you, as far as residential go here in Texas, because now they're starting to do some siding and all that, but mainly a lot of the houses around here, we use brick and rock. I'll just tell you that 90% probably, or especially in the newer areas. And when you look at those, you know, the way that brick's there, you're not going to put a cut-in box there. It's not going to work. So
and then that's even a damp location in itself there.
Yeah,
and you're trying to tell me you're going to put a cover over that's going to seal out moisture?
Yeah, what
Rick?
they'll do is they'll come out, and usually if they have to add something outside, it'll be mounted on the outside of the brick, and
Right.
then they'll come up with a conduit, go up through uh, the overhang soffit there, and then they'll kick back from there and mount everything. So we really don't have that problem here so much. But if I was an
Sure.
inspector going out, you know, let's just say it's a new job. If I go out there as an inspector, first of all, uh, more than likely, if you came in after the fact, the inspector probably is not even going to see that you did a cut in box anyway once you put the cover on and all that.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
hypothetically, let's just say
There,
that,
dude, there was a lot of comments. I wanted to say that's freaking awesome. All the participation I had in the Nat King Code. There was a lot of participation, and a lot of people said that. Like, just wait till inspector's gone and then cut it in.
yeah,
But at the same time, that's not what we're talking about. We're trying to have a code discussion here. And we're trying to say, what does the code say? What does the code allow? What does the code permit? To me personally, I don't see the code permitting a material that's gonna not outlive that hardy board. To me personally, I would not want that. Like I could see that to David's point, cutting around enough of the hardy board that you put the box on the other side of the hardy board, and then like if worst comes to worst, you pull that cover off, and if you have to change that box, you just change that box. It's not sitting on the hardy board, you know.
well, sure. And that's what I was referring to. Because when I look at it, when I was an inspector, if I'd have gone out there and they put the cut in boxes, I saw them, I'd say, why'd you put these in? They say, well, they added this. I'd say, understood, you're not going to take the sheetrock down and everything just to make it, permanent, mounted to the studs and everything. I'd say, okay, no big deal. It's no different than if somebody come in after the fact and added, after the building had been there for a month, in my opinion, or a week. You know,
Yeah,
that's
but
that's
you're
what it's
gonna
used for. But on the
you might
outside,
you might be opening up your magnifying glass on other things if you start seeing that, because you're like, what other things did they miss? And that's gonna be key. Like if they start missing big things, like where they're not doing certain things in like their mechanical rooms or whatnot, then you're gonna have your eye open more and go, wait a minute, are these guys know what they're doing? Because there's no reason they couldn't have just roughed these in, you know, and had them ready, even
oh
if they
sure,
just had a blank cover or
I,
whatnot, you know.
I've seen where they've come in and done stuff. Let's just say that you come in and you had a workstation, say in the garage, for instance, and they come in, they build the the uh, the bench and everything they're going to put on. Then right behind it, they build a board and everything, hang their tools on. Then they decide they want to put a receptacle in there. Well, guess what? They're going to put a couple of them wherever they want them, and they're going to put a cut-in box in there. You know,
Yeah,
and
and we're not saying that a flush mount installation is required, David. Like what we're saying is, like in this case, like rather than doing the cut in, you just put like a surface mount box. Like I know it could be like aesthetics or whatnot, but to me personally, you put like a wet location rated box in there. The reason that I was saying this is such a gray area, we brought this up before, James. When we're doing residential, we stub out an NM cable, we put a FS box. We
yeah,
stub out an NM cable, we put a disconnect for our HVAC equipment. We don't stub out a UF cable because it has to be wet location rated for that enclosure. So this is where the gray area comes in, David, that we were talking about when you go into 314.15, where it says that if you install an enclosure in a wet or damp location, then the wiring method needs to be in a damp or wet location. And like to me, I don't know for sure, David, if there's anything that requires it to be like a flush mount installation. Like to me personally, I think that plastic box is just fine. But to me personally, when you mention like that hardy board, you tell me, hey, we're gonna have that hardy board on here. That's gonna last 40 years. Is that plastic box gonna last 40 years on top of that hardy board? I'm gonna say no. I bet you that. I bet you that plastic box busts up at 20 years, easy. But I don't know for sure. I haven't done enough testing or stuff to know personally what this stuff lasts as. If I was an inspector, I wouldn't be totally cool with that. I mean, that's I can guarantee it's gonna last longer than my career as an electrical inspector. But I mean, is that what we're after when you come to code compliance?
Well, that's
I
one
mean,
reason you see, like here in Texas, we'll use THHN/THW, and that alleviates that problem, first of all, for the conductor. And then
mm-hmm.
what I've seen where they've done, where they've got siding and things like that, what the inspectors here are requiring is they'll just drill a hole, and then they'll come through that hole and they'll mount their box straight to the outside of that siding and everything. They don't flush it back in there because they say it's not rated for that. They
Yeah,
consider
and
that to be a rain location right there, and it needs to be rain. The enclosure has to be rated for that. And
yeah, and it's funny because I was talking to a bunch of different people like in the industry, and they were like, "Yeah, I never really looked at it like that before." And I'm like, dude, that's a NEMA 1 rated box mounted on the exterior of a structure. Like, you could say, well, it's mostly in the wall, but it's not 100% in the wall. I agree with David. I think that there's a way that you could cut that hardy board out of the way enough to where you could recess it all the way in the wall, and it might be a little bit better. And then that's what I'm saying. You're not dependent on that hardy board, like if something goes wrong with that receptacle or something, then you just bust that receptacle out of there, put another one in there, and the hardy board doesn't get damaged. It comes down to that whole accessible thing, readily accessible. Is that box, are you going to be able, like, when you go look at like one that's like installed in the building, that's installed in the wall, that's not going anywhere. That's going to stay there. And if you have to replace that siding or whatever, you don't have to remove anything. I mean, you're going to remove the receptacle, you're going to remove, all your stuff, and they're going to redo the siding, and then you're going to put everything back. Everything's going to stay the same electrical. When you're dependent on that cut-in, I don't know. I think it's a little different.
well,
I mean,
what I would
they say you shouldn't have to remove part of your electrical if you have to remove part of the building or whatever.
if you really wanted it to be flush, what I would say in that case is all right. We'll just pick the spot you want it. Go inside your wall there. Cut you uh, probably a say 18 by 18 inch or 12 inch, whatever your centers are on the house, and have you hole there. Go in, set it inside, then you cut there. You got it mounted on the inside to the stud. Then come back and patch it all up and paint over it.
Yeah.
If you really want it flush mounted, then you can consider that inside like they did all the other receptacles.
Yeah, and where this kind of stems from too was Mike Holt posted on Facebook, and he had a thing with like a cut-in and the hardy board, and it was a metal cut-in, and I was kind of like, wow. I was like, I don't know that that's okay, because what's the metal cut-in? What's mounting it? It's mounted to the hardy board. So if you go to change your hardy board, you're getting rid of part of your outlets, so I don't know. I mean, I could be wrong, but yeah, and I agree, David. Like if the inspector's going off the installation instructions, it says, cut to wall size and, tighten. Yeah, you're right. And there's no code violation.
I, I just look at what we do here in Texas, and I know, being for a long time, I was a moderator for the UTA BPI Building Professional Institute. We had inspectors all over Texas come all week. It was a whole week thing. We had all different types of classes. And this question was brought up. They were asking me about it. And I wasn't even teaching a class. We actually had somebody else teaching residential. And they asked me what my opinion was. And pretty much just what I've stated here. That's most jurisdictions are doing around here, and uh, they're just not going to let you take and use a cutout box on the outside. They consider that being outside. They don't consider it inside. So,
True.
and I look at it this way. Think of it. Just think of it this way. If I come outside and say I've got a built-in grilling area there and I got a receptacle there, okay? Do you consider that inside?
No.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Those are things that you look at. They don't consider it that way, and they make sure that everything's set up out there being rain tight around it because they know it's going to get rained on and everything else.
So, like, if you were doing an outside grilling area,
Mm-hmm.
I would use code times 3, and I would make sure it's a titanium box installed on top of your grill. You know what I mean? So I wouldn't be messing around at the Stallcup Ranch. You know what I mean? But like to me personally, it was just it kind of raised a red flag to me when I see this cut-in box installed in like a wet location.
Mm-hmm.
Because to me it goes back to the whole bless you.
Thanks.
It goes back to the whole picking and choosing thing. What we were talking about
Sure
is
it does.
these guys like picking and choosing where they want to apply something and where they don't want to apply something. They're like, well, this table says you can't use that box, but since it's a picture and I'm using it for teaching, then it's gonna be all right. And to me personally, I don't really see that much of a real world issue with it. But when I saw that those ears of the receptacle on the exterior of the building, that's gonna get moisture in there.
Yes,
At a
it is.
certain point in time, that metal box will rust out and fall apart.